enter this moment with very mixed emotions. Proud of what the men and women of the Department of Justice have accomplished over the last 6 years, and at the same time, very sad that I will not be a formal part of the great things that this department and this president will accomplish over the next 2. I want to thank you, Mr. President, for the opportunity that you gave me to serve and for giving me the greatest honor of my professional life.
Eric Holder will soon no longer be the top law enforcement official in these United States. He will leave behind a deep divide over what he actually accomplished, why he refused time and again to follow the rules he is charged to enforce, and how to, in many minds, repair the racial damage he has left behind. Welcome back to MidPoint. The president of McKee Communications and Newsmax Contributor, Clarence McKee, joins us today. Clarence.
How are you?
Always a pleasure to see you, my friend. You also, good to see you. President Obama praised what he called the people's lawyer as Eric Holder stepped down. How do you react to that?
Well, over a year ago on Newsmax.com, I recommended that he step down. At that time, 52% of the people thought he should step down too. I think he's leaving a legacy of scandal, political correctness, and race baiting, which is not a good one for any attorney general. If you want to hide something, give it to Eric Holder and the Department of Justice. You want to hide what's going on in the IRS, give it to Justice. You want to hide what's going on in Fast and Furious, put it in Justice. You want to hide Benghazi and take 3 weeks to get FBI agents, give it to the Department of Justice. And it's a department known for political correctness, you know, the war on terror. Oh my gosh, can't use those words. Radical Islam, let's get that out of the FBI manuals. And Fort Hood. No murder, no atrocity there. It's workplace violence. And then there's the enemy combatants. No, got to call them criminal defendants. So what he's done, he's brought political correctness to the entire Department of Justice. It's politicized, and it's not good. And then you've got, you talked about the racial divide in the open. It's a very race-baiting administration. You know, here you have, in the United States of America, every person in charge of domestic security and protecting all of Americans just happen to be black. The president, the attorney general, and the head of the Homeland Security. Now, if this was such a racist country, you wouldn't have a president who was black, and you wouldn't have Mr. Holder. But my problem with Mr. Holder, and I hear he's a great guy, every single time they have an issue, they get into the race baiting. If you're criticized in Congress, the congressmen are racist. As the Black Caucus said, he was found in contempt of Congress. Oh, that was racism. Oh, it's just like crying wolf too often. And that's a problem. Shouldn't be.
Much of what you've just talked about here, is it not in line specifically, though, with what the president has always wanted to do, which is the soft pedal? You talked about basically, it's not terrorism, it's this. It's not a war, it's a conflict. Everything is very soft pedaled, and that in itself does not only bother people here in America, but it bothers people around the world as well, and we are seen as being weaker in the eyes of many people because of this softness.
Just ask ISIS, right? You know, the junior varsity team, all of a sudden, they were what? We don't think there's any threat. They got 30,000 of them out there now. And now I think they're using the war on terror, actually using the name. So this is the legacy of this attorney general and this president. In fact, the attorney general has been a heat shield for the president.
It's funny you say that, because I actually saw that in some of the articles today. What does that mean exactly, that he's been the heat shield for President Obama?
Take the heat. I'm not going to, plausible deniability. I'm not going to say that the people don't like me as president, the 52%, because I'm black, but the attorney general can make a little hint about it. Oh, there's some racial animus there. Who are they kidding? There are racists in the United States, of course. There always have been, always will be. But this country elected twice a black man as president of the United States. So, and the whole world sees that. So you don't have to go to the United Nations and bring up Ferguson to say we have our problems too. You know, that was rather another poke in the eye at the United States. If you want to talk to the world about how to heal racial divisions and gender divisions, talk about the history of the suffrage movement, women's rights, civil rights, but don't get into Ferguson, Missouri.
But what about those who will say, and again, I always try to get both sides here, those who would say, okay, fine, we have a black president, a black attorney general that are here, but there is still racism in the country right now, and just because, you know, you've heard this before, you've heard these arguments, that America's still a very racist country, and they point to Ferguson, and they point to certain events like this, and they say, this is the evidence right here, and this is why we need Barack Obama and Eric Holder in here to repair this.
And Al Sharpton too, probably, right? No, listen.
I wasn't going to bring Al Sharpton into it because I tried desperately not to bring him into much conversation.
Well,
at
apparently
all,
the president's
but he is
going
part of it.
to president's going to bring Mr. Sharpton into the decision-making and advisor group on who's going to be the next Attorney General. There's racism in the United States, of course. You know, a lot of blacks, including me, always wonder when we're driving up I-10, am I going to get pulled over? So it just happens that way. But you can't deny where the country's come from, where it's been. It's come a long way. But to say it's racism, what it does is, Chicken Little, was it? The sky's falling in?
Right.
You talk about the sky falling in, when it really does, no one's going to believe it.
Well, is that just it? Are things like this, when they're done, does this permeate what goes on about the racism and the divide in this country? And this basically makes it wider than anything else and keeps it going when it could be quieted down.
Well, you have white people who say, well, golly, I voted for this black guy, and now because I don't like what he's doing, I'm a racist. It's counterproductive. The real racists can hide behind all of that.
So we definitely come down to Fast and Furious. We definitely come down to testimony. We definitely come down to a lot of things that have happened to Eric Holder, in your opinion, or that he has done and not done. In your opinion, what is the single most egregious thing that Eric Holder has been at the forefront of during this administration to create that racial divide, make things worse in America?
Politicizing the Department of Justice. You know, you've had some very, attorneys general are really the president's cover and protection. You want somebody who's your friend.
Heat shield.
Exactly. Now, you had John Mitchell as Attorney General for Nixon, but none of them really have politicized the Department of Justice or the Civil Rights Division the way Mr. Holder has. And whoever comes in, it's going to be the same way. You're not going to get any changes because the president wants a guy or a woman who will do what he says and can be his shield.
Are you then buying those and people who say that this was no coincidence, this certainly wasn't? Some people are chalking this up to a health reason, amongst other things, but there are those who say, wait a minute, let's get this done before the midterms. Let's make sure that this doesn't happen before the Republicans take control.
Exactly. So he'll resign, be on. If the Democrats lose, a lame duck Senate will confirm whoever comes in. And then, of course, if Ms. Ginsburg decides to leave in the meantime, right, in the Supreme Court, that would be a good possibility to put in to counteract Clarence.
Is that the greatest possibility you see, Eric Holder next winding up in the Supreme Court?
Well, it's only going to happen if they do it before
sure.
the Republicans take over the Senate.
Okay, what about the replacement then? I mean, you basically say that whoever comes in, the president wants to make sure whoever it is rubber stamped, if you will, and fits exactly what he wants. Is there anybody that strikes you immediately that you think is probably going to be, or is at least a number one choice?
I don't know about a number one or two choice. I would think Duval Patrick.
Would
governor,
make sense.
Okay. Now, Ms. Napolitano might be very good. Of course, you're going to have would be the fourth woman on the Supreme Court, or third. She would be good because she went over there to Homeland Security and suddenly got rid of the war on terror. Remember that? So she follows the rules.
Last time I checked, it's still going on overseas, but that's another story altogether.
And then the term war on terror. And then she was saying the border was secure, too. Remember?
True.
So she was somebody who's a good puppet for the president. I don't know, other than Patrick and her, who they might think of. Or whoever Al Sharpton has in mind.
The saints preserve us, please. I'm completely speechless at that one.
Of all of the black people in this country,
having Al Sharpton involved in making any decision would be frightening for this country.
Judges, lawyers, elected officials, they're going to go to Al Sharpton. It's amazing. Tells you a lot, doesn't it?
I got about a minute left here, so let me ask you then, in your opinion then, is Eric Holder maybe not the reason, but the main reason why we have such a huge gulf, a huge divide of racial disparity in this country right now?
He and the president, I think. And also because you have the Black Caucus is set on his heels while blacks are being devastated economically and not said a thing. You know, they don't criticize this president at all. When everybody knows that if it were a white president or a Democratic president too, as well, a white one, or Republican, they'd be up in the air over what's going on. So they have created its own double standard. But the tone has been set from the top. The president and Mr. Holder wouldn't say anything the president does once said, right? Who mentioned Ferguson at the United Nations? The president did. So, the peas in a pod.
We've got about 15 seconds left. Is the black community going to finally get it this time around in the midterms and in the presidential election that they have not been told the truth? Absolutely.
Oh, no. First of all, blacks don't have to go vote. You know, I think it was in the state of Florida, only 5% of the black folks voted. After all the deaths in this state of blacks who died and were lynched and beaten. Florida was per capita #1 in the country in the 30s on lynching of blacks, and blacks still aren't voting. So that's what the president ought to be telling black people to do: go vote. That's what was wrong in Ferguson. Only 12% of the people voted.
Let's see if we can get them all back to the polls.
Okay, thank you very
Always
much.
a pleasure, Clarence.
Okay,
Thanks so
bye,
much
Jim.
for coming in
Okay.
today. Later on this hour, the weekly chance to break out the gloves and laugh at those who often not only deserve but demand our attention, the American politician.